Well, welcome to our GMAT Verbal Refresher class and the MBA Admissions Tips workshops. My name is Sergey and I'm a senior instructor with AdmitMaster. Today we have a very special guest, Corey Huari from the recruitment team at the Desertel Faculty of Management at McGill University. I know some of you are joining here today to also learn about the McGill program, but even if you haven't heard of the McGill program yet, I'd like to encourage you to stay because Corey is going to talk a lot about different admissions tips and how McGill, which is one of the most competitive MBA programs in Canada, is making decisions about whom to admit, whom to give scholarships to. So I'd like to encourage you to stay. This is going to be towards the end of our class tonight. Thanks so much for sharing where you're coming from. We have a lot of people from the Western Hemisphere, but we also have quite a large number of people from Africa. And today we actually have a lot of people from Asia and Oceania. So good morning to you. Now, today is going to be about the verb, and I'm actually going to close the poll right now, get it out of our way. Now, if at any point throughout the class tonight, you have questions, you could use the Q&A box. And if you have a question that can't wait, that you'd like for us to interact and ask the question right away, then please use the chat box. Especially because of the large number in the seminar, you can't really unmute yourself and ask a question. This is kind of a little bit different from our normal, regular GMAT class where you can actually be on video and ask questions. So today we're going to interact through this chat box, but don't worry, we'll make it as interactive as possible. Now, when we approach the verbal reasoning section of the GMAT, many people, when I speak with them for the first time, and I speak with a lot of people every day, we do a lot of one-on-one consultations, a lot of these seminars, many people are going to say, well, this is the English section. And I think you're going to see in a few moments that it's not really about knowing English, and it's not even called an English section. And perhaps just to demonstrate the point, a little bit of a cultural journey. McGill University is located in Montreal, which is a French-speaking province in Canada. And even though the university itself is English, I wanted to start perhaps just again to demonstrate that this is not an English test by giving you a really, really short lesson in French. Does anybody know, and please put it in the chat box, what is the French word for to take? If anybody knows, if anybody speaks French, just please put it in the chat box. What's the French word for to take? Yes, thank you. A few people are saying prendre. You're absolutely right. And what's the French word for to learn? To learn. Yes, wow, I see a lot of responses. It's apprendre. So see, in the French language, these two words to take and to learn have the same root. That means they have very similar meanings. So what this means is that for you to learn something, you have to take. So I'd like to encourage you to take as much as possible from this seminar, take some notes, and most importantly, participate. We're going to do a few questions all throughout the seminar, and the idea is to actually teach you some skills and show you how things are going to work on the GMAT, and not just simply give you information that you can easily find online. How's that? Now, we're going to begin by doing a question, exams. And this is going to be a critical reasoning question. Now, many of you mentioned you are just starting, so perhaps you haven't seen these questions. Well, don't worry. The question is going to be pretty self-explanatory. You're going to see a short passage, then you're going to see a question related to this passage, and then eventually I'm going to show you the answer choices as well. But we are going to begin by reading the passage and reading the question. I'm going to give you approximately 45 seconds to do so. So here you go. All right, well, I cheated a little. I actually gave you a full minute to read this passage. So let me ask you a question. During this time, the minute that I gave you, how many times did you read this passage? A very simple question. Once, two times, three times, four times? Okay, most people are saying twice or three times. Okay, a couple people are saying once and some parts twice, three times. Okay, and let me ask you a question. On a scale of 0 to 10, how confident you are that you can now answer this question, that the question and the passage are actually very clear and you know exactly what to do? Okay, great. Most of you are kind of around 5 to 7 scale. So let's now see the answer choices. I'm going to show you the answer choices. I'm going to give you another 45 seconds. And just to make things a little more fun, just so that I know what you guys are doing, I'm actually going to launch a quick poll so that you can share with me what you think is the right answer. So there you go. All right, it's been a minute and a half, and I wanted to show you what the answers look like. First of all, only about half of the people voted, and here's how the answers look like. So as you could see, about 40% of people voted for B, but a fairly large number of people voted for C, D, and E. Well, let's see. Let's see what actually is going on here. Now, the question was about an argument of two people. And this was an argument about some anthropology, basically history about human development. And then these two people argue about something. And the question is actually, what is Jamal doing to respond? Now, notice that the question itself doesn't actually ask us anything about anthropology. In fact, all of the information that we need to know about anthropology, of course, is in front of us. We do not need to bring any additional information. In fact, when you read this, most of the words here are not very difficult. And yet, for most of us, it was challenging. For half of the people answered, and of them, only 40% actually picked the right answer. So only about 20% of people, of everybody on this call, answered this question correctly. And everybody else that didn't answer still works on it or picked their own answer. So what gives? What's really a challenge here? Well, when you look at the answer choices is actually what makes this problem challenging. Now, in the original passage, when we talked about anthropology, it was really about a diet of early humans, and then this being somewhat reflected on the diet of current humans. And then Jamal was saying, well, these are not exactly the same people. There's something different about them. So what exactly is Jamal doing? Well, when we talk about what is he doing, then the sorts of words that we need to pay attention to would probably be not the words about anthropology. Rather, these would be these sorts of words: refuting, qualify, supports and broaden, assumption, conclusion, and maybe evolution, and expressing doubts. So these are the words we need to understand. These are the words that we could see in all kinds of other passages, not just about anthropology. And these are the words that tell us how the arguments were structured, essentially how these two people were arguing. So being able to see these details among all the jargon, and I intentionally gave you a question where the answer choice is actually harder than the question itself. The passage wasn't actually that difficult. Sometimes it's going to be the opposite. Sometimes both of them are going to be really challenging. But what's really the difference? So let's look at these answer choices. Is Jamal refuting her statements about prehistoric answer? Is he trying to argue something about the prehistoric people? No, he isn't. Now, B says he's going to qualify, and C says he's going to support and broaden. Well, these may not be the words that we're using in our everyday life, especially the words qualify and broaden. So we'll come back to these words. Support's a little easier to understand. Now, let's look at D. He's questioning her assumption and whether this permits any conclusion about the evolution. Well, there are a few words here that we could pick out that probably would very quickly disqualify this answer choice. First of all, she isn't making any assumptions. Secondly, she's not trying to make conclusions about the evolution. She's trying to make conclusions about the diet. So D isn't right. Now, how about E? Expressing doubts about whether most human beings today are as healthy as our prehistoric ancestors were. Well, among the people who actually answered, this was a less popular answer. But usually, this is actually a more popular answer because he is talking about people not moving as much. So now what's actually happening is we're thinking, okay, so not moving, that means they're not that healthy, right? In our minds, we're trying to connect things that perhaps are not actually the same. So we need to be careful about making our own assumptions. So now that we got rid of 3 out of 5 answer choices, let's come back and talk about qualify and broaden. Now, broaden means we're trying to say, well, if this is true of a certain number of people, it's going to be true of more people. Now, where qualify is actually the opposite. It would be something like, if we talk about everybody, then qualifying means we need to narrow down. So if I were to say, well, I know a few people in Canada who love outdoors, therefore, everybody in Canada loves outdoors. So this is a very broad statement. I need to qualify it by saying, well, perhaps everybody loves outdoors in the summer, or perhaps certain types of people love outdoors, right? And that's exactly what he is doing. He's saying, well, look, it's not perhaps for everyone, because many people don't move as much, but some people probably do. So let's qualify this. It's not going to apply to everyone. And that's exactly the right answer. So this is a sort of an analysis that you're going to have to do on the real test. And there are going to be passages about almost anything. We'll actually come back to the structure of arguments. But I wanted to talk really quickly about what really is going to make a difference between people who get these sorts of questions, so people who get to 700 plus scores, and people perhaps who don't, who get stuck at much lower scores. And to find an answer, I'm actually going to ask the GMAT. We'll do a little Q&A. Let's ask them, what really separates? And the answer is in the official guide. It's also on MBA.com. And here's the answer. And that is, unlike most of the other tests we've ever done, they were testing some sort of a knowledge. Perhaps our knowledge of history or knowledge of anthropology, right? If it's an anthropology exam. Well, here, they ask us a question about anthropology, but yet we're trying to get into a business school, because it's not about knowing any subject matter. Instead, it's about demonstrating our higher order reasoning skills. So can we think logically? Can we understand what's really important? And that's going to be the theme of the workshop tonight. And I'm going to actually show you a few things that are going to be really important as we go through the verbal section. Now, of course, you need to have some basic foundational background knowledge. That's what you normally find in different books. That's what you normally find in different online self-study programs. They really help you build a very solid foundation. But according to the GMAT, this foundation isn't actually as advanced. Now, you might be thinking, especially in math, well, I need to know all of these things. I need to know some pretty advanced calculus. And the answer is we don't. The sort of foundations that we need to know are so basic that most of us learn them in the middle school, not even in the high school. That unfortunately for most of us means that we have to come back and remember it or refresh it or review it. And that's usually the first step in preparing for the GMAT. That's why many people, when they begin studying for the GMAT, would either subscribe to some sort of an online platform or perhaps read a book, because that's what's going to help them build a foundation. But beyond that, we really need to invest some time in starting to develop these higher order reasoning skills. Essentially, we need to learn how to think differently. That's going to be very important. Now, I've heard this analogy many times, and you have heard this analogy probably as well, that studying for the GMAT is going to be kind of like going to the gym, but for your brain. And I want to use an analogy. I love analogies. They really help us understand things. So think of preparing for the GMAT as, let's say, learning how to swim. Well, we can get all the theory about learning how to swim, and that's really helpful. But we really need to jump into a pool, and we need to do a lot of questions, and we need to see what we're doing wrong. And perhaps we need to ask our coach sometimes questions, and we need to see other people doing it. So that's going to be a really important part of the process. And then perhaps somebody could actually keep us also safe when we're jumping into a pool. So that's going to be really important, right? We are developing a skill. We're not just developing a knowledge. So how do we do this? I'm actually going to give you a few ways of developing the skill. And of course, we're going to start developing these skills tonight. So for the next hour and a half, I'm going to be your coach. And I'm really grateful that you've come here so that I can teach you some skills and you can take them away and apply them to your GMAT preparation. So here's what we're going to do today. We start with a question to get you a little outside of your comfort zone, hopefully, and start thinking a little bit differently. We talked about that one thing that separates the 500 and 700 plus scores. And that was, of course, the skill, your ability to actually apply the knowledge. That's really what the whole business is about, right? It's not about knowing things. It's about being able to do things. That's what the MBA program is about. When Corey comes in, he's going to talk a lot about the skills. And this is one of the things that the business school is looking for when you're applying. That's why business schools accept the GMAT, just because the GMAT is demonstrating whether you have these skills, regardless of what background you came from. Now, of course, we'll talk about the verbal section. We'll continue to talk about the verbal section today. We'll talk about different resources that can help you study at home. There are so many different resources that literally, if you were to read every single resource available in the GMAT, our lifetime is not going to be enough. So we need to pick and choose, and we'll talk about the different types of resources, and then you can choose what works best for you. There's no one size fits all. That's why there are all of these resources. And then, of course, at the end, we'll get some insider tips from Corey, and they're insider because Corey is actually working on the inside. He's going to be able to share these tips with you. Now, there's something I want to show you right now that many of you have seen before. And the reason why I wanted to show you is most people see this, and yet when I ask most people, what are the different sections on the GMAT, what do I usually hear? There's an essay, there's integrated reasoning, which is integrating something, we don't really understand what. There's math and there's English. And again, I just wanted to bring your attention that there are no words math and there are no words English. Indeed, what we are seeing here is the word analytical, and the word reasoning mentioned 3 times. So this is really what the test is about. Today is about the verbal reasoning section. So that means reasoning with English words. We also have a quantitative math refresher class, which is all about reasoning with numbers, which is also, of course, a very important part of the GMAT. Both of these sections contribute half and half towards your total score, 200 to 800. And by the way, for the full disclosure, your analytical writing assessment and the integrated reason section do not contribute towards the 200 to 800 score. However, schools are still looking at them, so it's still important that you do them. We can just skip them. Now, these two sections, quant and verbal, are actually the longest section of the GMAT. So the GMAT's about 3 hours, and each of them takes about a third. And these two sections are also what's called the computer adaptive section, or they use a computer adaptive algorithm. Now, you've probably heard a lot about this, but what I wanted to highlight here is that, of course, when you answer the question correctly, the difficulty of the question goes up. When we answer the question incorrectly, the difficulty of the question goes down. But this is a little counterintuitive because I remember from my university, I had some subjects that were so difficult that I was really hoping that I'm going to get an easy question on the test. And if I get an easy question, I'm going to get an easy mark. And if I get a hard question, well, I'm out of luck. But here on the GMAT, there are a lot of questions, and the GMAT is going to vary the difficulty. And essentially, the only way to do well on the GMAT is to see a lot of hard questions, because your score is pretty much determined by what level you get to. You can think of this as a computer game. Every time you answer a question correctly, the difficulty goes up. It's an adaptive algorithm. We use it in our course, adaptive algorithm, a lot in our homework and preparation for classes. And in preparation for the real exam, we use that system a lot because it really has to adapt to your level. If you are at a very high level, you don't want to waste time on easy questions. And if you're not yet, well, you don't want to get every single question wrong. So the difficulty is going to go down. But eventually, if you do want to get a high score, you're going to have to get used to answering difficult questions. That's the only way. So you're going to have to get trained for a challenging exam. That's going to be really important. Now, in these two sections, quant and verbal, there are different types of questions. On the quantitative reason section, of course, there are problem solving and data sufficiency questions. And in the verbal reasoning section, there's sentence correction, critical reasoning, and reading comprehension. We are going to talk about all three today. So I'd like to, again, encourage you to take notes. And then if you'd like, if you haven't been to our mass refresher class, come back on July 8th, which is going to be a Thursday, 3 weeks from now, when we are going to tackle these two question types. Now, since tonight we're talking about the verbal section, I wanted to ask you a question. And this is not a rhetorical question. I actually do want to hear from you. Is the verbal section hard? And if it is, what really makes it hard? Why do you, and perhaps if you don't find it hard, perhaps why some other people might find it hard? What do you think? And I'm going to share some of the results with you here. And the results are pretty consistent with what I ask in our live classes as well. Many people are saying several answer choices look right. And there's actually the opposite is true as well, is that very often on difficult questions, all of the answer choices look bad. So that's very common as well. A lot of people are going by answer choices seem quite subjective, especially in sentence correction. I can look at the answer choice and I can say, well, this is how I speak, but some other people might speak differently. So we can disagree. Many people are also saying, well, English isn't my first language. So how is it I'm supposed to actually tackle this section? Lots to read, not enough time, and lots of grammar rules to remember. So thanks so much for sharing this. Now, these are all very good reasons. However, let me bust a myth. And that is that the answer choices may seem subjective just because we don't really know what to look for yet. They're actually not subjective. There's some very hard and fast rules that will tell us that this is right and this is wrong. And this is going to be even more pronounced in sentence correction. Now, in sentence correction, we are asked to do something with a sentence. So it's a fairly short question. Now, we are actually supposed to answer this question really quickly because an average time, if you've done some math, an average time is about 1.75 minutes per question in the verbal section. But imagine how much you have to read in reading comprehension. I'm actually going to teach you tonight how to read efficiently. And in critical reasoning, you're going to have to read quite a lot. But in sentence correction, we're going to read very little. That's why we really only have about 1 minute to 1 minute 15 seconds to deal with a sentence correction question. So how do we actually deal with it? And most importantly, what is it that's being tested in sentence correction? So if anybody knows what's actually being tested, please throw it in the chat box. And I'm going to show you that they're actually a couple of things, and you know, they're actually 3 different things that are being tested in sentence correction. So if anybody knows what at least some of them are, just please put them in the chat box. Somebody's showing you logical construction. Okay. All right. Then the GMAT, the official guide, will use some terms that are very hard to understand for some people. So let me use simpler terms. How's that? The 3 things being tested are grammar, meaning, and style. What this means is that the sentence must use proper grammar. It must convey the meaning properly. Whatever we're trying to say, that's what it must convey, as well as it must use a good style of expression, right? Something that's very clear to understand. Because in the business world, if we're drafting a contract or if we are negotiating with someone, if we're hard to understand, that's not going to be a good skill. So these 3 things are very important. Now, the grammar takes up the bulk of what's being tested. And when we're thinking about the grammar, and many of you mentioned, well, there are so many grammar rules in the English language, and you're absolutely right. The English language is a very interesting language because that is not a pure language. Unlike many other languages that were created actually as pure languages, English was not. It was a language that was made up of a bunch of other languages, and that's why every time there is a rule, there's an exception. For example, usually we add an S at the end if we want to create a plural noun. But we don't say child, we say children. We don't say phenomenons, we say phenomena. It's because these words come from different languages. So it's easy to become overwhelmed and spend a lot of time trying to learn all these grammar rules. And usually when you're reading a book about the GMAT, there's going to be so many different grammar rules, and the book will usually not tell you that only about 5 of these grammar rules show up on the majority of the questions, and 9, a grand total of 9 grammar rules, cover 95% of the questions on the GMAT. So if you learn these 9 grammar rules and never read the rest of the rules, you're going to be good with 95% of the questions in sentence correction. And the only 12 scored questions, so 95% covers pretty much all of them. That's how we study efficiently. We know what to look for because we all have limited time for us to prepare. If we had the remaining lifetime to prepare for the GMAT, then yes, of course, we can learn all of these grammar rules. So what are the most important grammar rules? I want to touch upon a couple tonight. And the first one has to do with the way that we structure languages in the English language. Now, in the English language, whenever we're writing a sentence that is supposed to describe something, we need to use a minimum of 2 words. Now, this is not the same in other languages. I know many of you come from Latin America. So for example, in Spanish or in Russian or in Italian, you could have a sentence with just 1 word and it will be a perfectly good sentence. But in English, we need to have 2 words. Does anybody know, and please throw it in the chat box, what are the 2 words that we must have in the English language for this to be a sentence? Okay, a few people are saying, I need to have a subject and I need to have a verb. You are absolutely right. So a subject is what or whom the sentence is about, and the verb is what is the subject doing. Now, the proper term is a predicate, but who cares? We need to beat the test, so we're going to be using something simpler. Let's call it a verb, because that's what usually it is. Now, when you're looking at the sentence, first of all, very often, you're going to need to check whether I actually have a subject and a verb. And there's going to be a few indicators. And in our GMAT Mastery program, we actually spent quite a bit of time on this rule because we're going to show you what exactly you can look for in the sentence so that you can know that this rule is actually being tested, the rule of having a subject and having a verb. But I'm going to give you just a very simple example. If I were to say, Sergey is teaching a class, that would be a perfectly well-written sentence. I have a subject, Sergey, and a verb is teaching. However, what if I were to say Sergey teaching a class? It seems like I still have a verb, which is the word teaching. And of course, if the sentence were to be a lot longer, then sometimes it's easy to lose track of that word is that was dropped. But yet, that would create what's called a sentence fragment. It's actually missing a verb because teaching by itself is not a verb. Is teaching is a verb, but teaching is not. It's called a participle. But we'll get to this in due time. So once you know that you have a subject and you have a verb, there's one more thing that we need to check, and that is the subject-verb agreement. What this means is the subject and the verb must agree with each other. So how is it that they agree? Well, that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked. Well, they need to agree, at least on the GMAT, in number. What this means is if you have a subject that describes something singular, which means one, you need to have a verb that also describes an action of one of something, a singular verb. And the same with plural, which describes multiple subjects. They require plural verbs. Now, this is very straightforward. I'm sure that this is now starting to come back. So perhaps we should do practice. I'm going to give you now a few sentences. And again, just to make things more fun, I'm going to launch here a poll so that you can let me know what is right and what's wrong. Here are the 5 sentences. I'm going to give you about 45 seconds. Please choose what you think is right for each one of them. All right, well, it has been a minute. So if you need to click that submit button, please do so now. I'm going to close the poll in just 5 seconds. And I'm going to actually share the results with you so that you could see what everybody voted for. All right, so here are the results of our poll. As you could see, the opinions are divided. If we look at number 1, the crowd was aware cheering the Raptors. Quite a lot of people, about a quarter of the people say where, and about 3/4 of the people say was. Well, how many crowds actually cheer the Raptors? Only one crowd. Now the crowd could be thousands of people, and just the NBA, the basketball team from Toronto that in 2019 won the NBA championship, which is the first time in history that a Canadian team won the NBA championship. That day, after the day when they won, was a Monday, and the whole city of Toronto was shut down, and 2 million people went on the street. 2 million person crowd was cheering the Raptors as one. And that's why we need to say was cheering, because it's one crowd. Now let's take a look at number 2. Amy and Bobby live in Boston. Well, most people chose live. A lot of people still chose live. So let me ask you a question. Who lives in Boston? Amy and Bobby. How many people? Well, Amy and Bobby are 2 people. 2 is more than 1. That's why Amy and Bobby is plural. We have a plural subject, therefore we need to use plural verb. Live is the right answer. Let's look at number 3. Jason, as well as his 2 friends, take a GMAT prep course. Most people said take. The right answer, takes, takes. I know you're probably surprised. How come? We said Amy and Bobby live, but Jason as well as his two friends takes. What's different? Well, see, when we speak, we usually use as well as the same way as we would use and. We think it's the same, but grammatically it's not. And means we are creating a list. We can also say Amy, Bobby, Charlie, and Diane. Doesn't really matter. But in the list, we're going to use the word and. However, if we don't have the word and, we don't have a list. That means we're not listing things. We're not listing people here. That means that Jason and his two friends are not all taking a GMAT prep course, as well as is actually what's called a modifier phrase, also known as a descriptor phrase. You can think of this as just getting some additional information. You can also think of this in simpler terms. If you don't have the word and, you don't have a list. So you have to be careful about what's the subject. So what's the subject here, or who's the subject? Well, it could be Jason or could be two friends, but it's not both of them because there's no word and. And I think it's pretty obvious at this point that Jason is actually the subject. And because Jason is singular, we need to say takes. Let's take a go at number 4. Neither her brother nor Susan. That's actually a very interesting question. Somebody is asking in the chat box, what about Amy or Bobby? So this is where we're going to see Amy or Bobby. Well, if we're talking Amy or Bobby, how many people actually live in Boston? Well, you might also have heard from your math classes that there's an inclusive or an exclusive or, which complicates things a little bit. But for the grammar rules, or means one or the other. So if we are saying Amy or Bobby, that means only one of them. And even though we don't know who, we're going to use lives. But when we talk about neither her brothers nor Susan, it's the same idea of saying or, neither or nor, either or, basically the same structure. Then, see, it's possible that it's the brothers that have been to China, but it's also possible that it was Susan that has been to China. And of course, in these two cases, we're going to use different verbs, which of course complicates things even more. Conveniently, there is a rule, and that is the rule that we need to know if we were to answer this sort of a question correctly. And the rule says whatever subject is closer to the verb, if you have an or. Now, it doesn't apply in other examples. Like, it doesn't apply, for example, we talked about Jason and friends. If we said Jason or his two friends, it would have been take. But here, Susan is closer to the has or have. Therefore, the right answer to this question is has been to China. Now, finally, the board of directors has or have decided. Well, who has decided? Is it the board or the directors? This is when we could probably think of this answer choice could be subjective, because some people might think it's the board as a whole that decided, and some people think it's the people, the directors, who have decided. So what is the right answer then, if this is kind of somewhat subjective? Well, hold on for a minute. I'm going to teach you a rule, and you'll know exactly why the answer is actually has and not have. And you also know exactly why it's the board that has decided and not the directors who have decided, even though logically it makes more sense. I'm going to show this to you in a moment. And for us to understand this, we need to understand one thing. And that is that when you're looking at the sentence, and I know some of the people are saying, I need a noun and a verb. That's not entirely true, because not every noun is a subject. We actually have two types of nouns, and sometimes nouns take other parts of speech as well. Sometimes nouns actually act as verbs, sometimes nouns act as adjectives. But if it's a proper noun, then it could have either a role of a subject, which essentially means a noun that has a verb, or an object, which is a noun that doesn't have a verb. So if you're looking at a sentence and you see in a bunch of nouns and you know what noun has a verb, then that would be a subject. And if you don't, there would be an object. Well, when we talk about the board of directors, that's a little tricky because we actually don't know who performs the action. So we need a different rule. We need essentially to understand of these two words, the board and the directors, which one's a subject and which one's an object. And the rule that's going to help us is the rule of the preposition. So what's a preposition? Now, you may have heard the term, maybe not. You actually don't need to know the term. The GMAT is never going to ask you. But the preposition is essentially a short word that usually connects two nouns. For example, the preposition that's used very often on the GMAT is the preposition of, the board of directors. We can also say, we can also in other contexts use other prepositions like in or for or about. These are all prepositions, short words. So when we say the board of directors, any word that comes after a preposition, in which case of, would always be an object. There are no exceptions to this rule. So if you see a preposition, the board of directors, you know for sure the directors is an object. Now, the board in this case has to be the subject because there's nobody else who could do an action. Well, sometimes even what's coming before the preposition is also an object. It does depend on the context, but at least knowing that objects always come after the preposition is going to help you get rid of the majority of the nouns that are objects and really very quickly narrow down your choices to what are real subjects. And that's going to help you answer the question that deals with the subject-verb agreement. So this was the first type of an agreement rule, but there's another type of an agreement rule. And that is the rule that has to do with the pronouns. Now, I'm sure that you've heard pronouns before. In fact, I am using a pronoun right now in this very sentence, and that, of course, is the pronoun I. Now, pronouns replace nouns. We use pronouns such as he, she, or they, or them, and we use them to make the sentence better sounding or better written. Now, the pronouns, that's really what they do, is they replace nouns. So if you can think of the structure of a sentence, if you can think of the sentence as, let's say, a car, and we're trying to replace a part in that car. Well, there are two things we need to make sure. The first is that we are actually putting the right replacement part. And number two is we're putting it in the right place. So therefore, when we talk about pronouns, there are actually two rules that we have to be aware of. The first rule is the reference rule. That is, the pronoun has to refer very clearly to the noun it's replacing. I have to know exactly what sort of a pronoun I need to use here. So that's kind of like having the right part. I also need to make sure that it agrees with the noun it's replacing, so it's kind of in the right place. Let me show you a couple of examples of each of these rules, the reference rule and the agreement rule of a pronoun, and then we'll actually do a real GMAT question. So here's the first sentence. If you can please let me know in the chat box whether the pronoun here is used properly. If yes, why yes? If no, why not? All right, most of you are saying she is replacing Elizabeth because Elizabeth's in the hospital. She's supposed to feeling unwell, so can't see anything wrong. And some of the people are saying, well, I don't really know who's feeling unwell. Well, theologically, we can think of Elizabeth feeling unwell because, I mean, she's in a hospital, right? So she must be the one feeling unwell. But I mean, if we think a little critically here, what if Elizabeth is a doctor and Melissa is going to visit Elizabeth? Is it possible? Yes, it is. So maybe logically it doesn't make a huge amount of sense, but grammatically, we actually don't know who is she. It could be either of them. And therefore, this is not the properly written sentence. We have not used the pronoun correctly. And if we want to correct this sentence, we're going to be looking for something that fixes this problem. And most likely, we're going to have to actually say the name of the person who was feeling unwell. This is going to make the sentence longer and it's not going to sound as well, but it's going to be grammatically correct. That's why we need to pay attention to the grammar first in a sentence before we pay attention to how it sounds. All right, how about the next sentence? And again, please put in the chat box. What do you think about this pronoun? Has it been used properly? Okay, a lot of people so far are saying yes, everything's correct. Some of the people are saying no, so if no, then why not? Okay, they refers to Walmart. Most people are saying Walmart. Some of the people are saying, well, no, well, really the opinions have been divided. Now, the reason why I wanted to show this is that this is how we speak. We say, I'm going to go to Walmart. They have a sale today. Like, who in their right mind are going to say, honey, I'm going to go to Walmart today because it has a sale? Have you ever heard anybody speaking that way? No. That's why sometimes we are our worst enemies, because how we speak isn't necessarily how we're supposed to write. Walmart is a company, and it's one company. Therefore, we should use it has good prices or it has a sale. Now, of course, if we talk about Walmart stores or Walmart people, then we're going to say they, but there wasn't anything about stores or people. That's why the properly written sentence here would be, I love shopping at Walmart because it has good prices. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. So why don't we test how much we've learned so far? Let's do a question. Let's do a real question from one of the past exams. I'm going to give you a minute, and I want your poll, and we'll talk about this question. All right, so that's been a minute, but a lot of people haven't answered yet. So I'm going to give you a little bit more time, maybe another half a minute or so. But if you answered this question already, I would be curious if you can put in the chat box what helped you make a decision about choosing the answer. I'm going to give you another 20 seconds or so. All right, so it's been 2 minutes and I've noticed that, well, still most people haven't answered, but let me share the results with you. Let me end the poll and share what everybody has chosen. So as you could see, most people overwhelmingly voted for C, and then a much smaller number for D and E, and a few people for A. Now, when I asked you to share what's actually wrong, most of the people said, okay, so that's what I chose, and that's why I chose C, because there's a subject-verb agreement and a parallel structure. All right. Now, I know you're probably thinking I'm a tough teacher, but I wouldn't really give you something that I haven't taught you yet. So if we're relying purely on parallel structure, then they would kind of defeat the purpose a little, because I was actually hoping that you can see some of the things that we just talked about. So what is it that we can see actually? Well, so far I taught you the subject-verb agreement. And when you look at the answer choices, you'll say, okay, so A, B, and C say sloths, and D and E say the sloth. So what's the difference? I mean, sloths obviously are many sloths, and that's an animal, and D is one animal, basically. So when you're thinking about this logically, how many sloths are there in Central and South America? Well, probably, hopefully many. And that's why most people are going to say, of course, that's why D and E shouldn't be right. But then some other people are going to say, well, wait a second. What if the sloth is an animal species? What if it simply describes the species and not a specific animal? That would still be okay, by the way. And the GMAT and different other standardized tests use that quite a lot. So if it's okay to use the sloth, then perhaps we should use or rely on a different rule. Let's try to rely on the subject-verb agreement. Well, the subject-verb agreement here would say I need to have the verb that agrees with my noun. So if I use sloths, then of course I should use hang or use. If I use the sloth, of course I should say hanks. And oh wait, 5 answer choices actually use the correct subject-verb agreement. So even though it would be really helpful if we were to use that, we can't. So the question is, why would the GMAT give us some answer choices with plural and some answer choices with singular? It is because there's more than one agreement rule. And the second agreement rule, if you remember, was the agreement rule with a pronoun. It was the noun to the pronoun. So I think it would be really helpful, wouldn't it, if we had a pronoun? It would be really, really super helpful if we had it. Oh, wait, we do. Not just once. We have it there twice. It's at the very end. Its coat and its toes. So we just talked about the Walmart, and the Walmart was it. But if we talk about its coat or its toes, do we want to talk about multiple sloths or do we want to talk about the sloth? I think it's a very easy decision. And we can get rid of A, B, and C right away. We don't even have to read them. We just need to recognize that we have to make this decision because only one of them could be correct. And the its is going to help us make that decision. So now we're down to 2 answer choices. And this is where we could rely on our parallel structure rule. And actually, at this point, many people are going to choose E because it looks like the sloth hangs, sleeps, and moves. So E seems like the right answer. However, right, the correct answer is actually D. And the reason why it's D, because E is wrong. So what makes E wrong? Again, the damn pronoun. See, we thought we're done with the pronouns, but the pronoun it at the end, yes, thank you, Paulina. The pronoun it actually breaks the parallel structure. Because if we're saying the sloth hangs, sleeps, and moves, well, that'd be okay. But if we're saying hangs, sleeps, and it moves, that's no longer a parallel structure because all of a sudden, instead of trying to add verbs, we're adding the whole clause. it moves. That's why D is right, because everything else is wrong. And if you're wondering, well, how come D is right? Well, I mean, for one reason, everything else is wrong, so who cares? And for the second, sleeping and moving simply describes the process of henning. We call these participle modifiers. There's nothing wrong with them, and sleeping and moving are actually parallel. So D does use the correct parallel structure, and that is the right answer. So what can we learn from this question? When we look at the sentence, let's not choose what sounds right or looks right or even feels right. Let's focus on what will help us make a decision. And what would help us here, most specifically, is choosing whether we need to pick sloths or the sloths. It was an easy decision if we pay attention to details. And that is actually the most important skill that's tested in sentence correction. In fact, we belong to a very small group of test prep organizations that get invited every year to go and visit the GMAT. We had this virtually this year, but before that, every year we'd go to the GMAT headquarters. Very small group of people, fewer than 20 people from across the whole Western Hemisphere, North and South America. So we are the company that get invited there as well. And I actually had a chance to meet the person who is responsible for the development of sentence correction questions. And as he was sharing some of the things that they're actually doing to make the questions tricky, this was his exact quote, is the #1 skill test in sentence correction is attention to detail. Now, this is some sort of a big skill. And when Corey comes in, he's going to talk a lot about different sorts of skills. And of course, attention to detail is really important when you are going to be doing your MBA or in your future manager. So how can you develop attention to detail? One of the ways to do this, one of the most efficient ways of doing this, is knowing what detail to pay attention to. That's why when you come to our GMAT mastery program, we're actually going to show you exactly what will show up in the sentences so that you know, if I see a sentence, here's what I should pay attention to because I have only a minute to answer this question. Now, what else is being tested? Of course, clarity of communication. This is where style comes in. And ultimately, it's really all about the skill. And it's about mastering the skill. It's not about just hearing about the skill. It's about trying and testing and practicing. So I'd like to encourage you to pull out your favorite question bank and just start doing a lot of sentence correction questions, most specifically subject-verb agreement and the pronoun sentences, because these actually take up a fairly large chunk of sentence correction questions. Sounds easy, right? Well, I wish the GMAT were this easy. I wish it were. And of course it's not, but I wish it were. And actually, I wanted to show you this sentence to ask you, what do you think about this sentence? Is this a good sentence? Did I use all of the words here properly? Or is there any word that you think we should replace with something else? What do you think? Okay, replace it. This was that easy? Maybe. Was? Yeah, actually many people are saying was. Well, the GMAT is a test. It's a singular test, and we just learned the subject-verb agreement rule. Well, I think you might be interested to learn that this sentence is actually written properly because the subject-verb agreement rule is the rule that applies only to what's called the descriptive mood of sentences. Sentences actually have 3 moods: descriptive, imperative, and subjunctive. Descriptive is when we describe something. Imperative is when we're saying, go and study for the GMAT. In this case, we actually don't need the subject. And here specifically, we're dealing with a subjunctive mood, which talks about something hypothetical that's not true. And in these examples, we would be using the word or the verb where all the time, regardless of whom we're talking about. So that's something we need to learn. This is more of an exception, but it is being tested on the GMAT, not that often. So the question becomes is, well, okay, so geez, if I'm not a native English speaker, how do I know all these rules? And see, the thing is, what we've learned so far, it's not really about being a native speaker, because even native speakers very often haven't learned these rules. In fact, I want to show you an example. Here's Natasha. She came to our class a few years ago, actually, literally off the plane. She landed here. She called us like the next day. 2 weeks later, she was in our course. She wanted to apply to a program, an MBA program, the same year. And English was actually her 3rd language. It was Portuguese and Spanish. She was from Brazil. And she was able to get to a 710 score, but most impressively, her verbal score was 42, which is 96th percentile. And all she did is learn the strategies and practice until they became good habits. So you can do that too. Now, of course, you need to be able to read English, and I'm going to teach you how to read now, but everything's possible, even though English might not be your first language. So how do I practice? Where's that question bank that I'm going to get? Well, there are different question banks, and I'm going to bring this back a little bit as well throughout this class or later in this class. But the official GMAT guide is a really good question bank. If you come to our class, then we're going to give you another book, which contains mostly medium to hard level questions. But if you are looking for access to a lot of high quality questions, high quality simulated questions for the GMAT, we actually have a question bank that comes with our course that contains over 5,000 questions. Now, if you take our GMAT mastery program, it is going to be included for you. But if you've already been studying a lot, or let's say you're working with a private tutor and you just need access to a lot of very good quality practice with some comprehensive analytics, you can get access to our platform. And normally it's $5.99 for 6 months, but you can go on our website, admitmaster.com/offer, and you're going to see a special offer and a code for you to save 30%. So that could be only $419 Canadian, $349 US. And if you only need it for 3 months, it's going to be even less. And you can also get it for 12 months. So that's a really, really good resource for practice. All of our students use it, and they just swear by it. They do lots of practice there to really help them pinpoint what is it they're still struggling with, what they're improving, so that they can have very, very targeted practice to prepare for the test day. All right, we'll keep talking about the resources later on, but let's talk about critical reasoning and reading comprehension. Now, critical reasoning is all about argument, and so far we've seen an argument made by 2 people. Now, very often arguments are going to be made by 1 person. And if I ask you what's an argument, well, very often we would say argument is when people are shouting at each other, right? That's an argument. But an argument on the GMAT is a logical argument. Like I mentioned, it's usually made by 1 person. So how can 1 person make an argument? Well, what we need is 2 things. Number 1 is we need a conclusion, also known as a claim, as a main point of an argument. And let me give you an argument. I attended an awesome GMAT class today. I take my preparation seriously. I make all the right decisions. Therefore, I will get a high score on the GMAT. What is it I'm trying to claim or say? What's my point? I'll get a high score on the GMAT. Why? I need an evidence. I need a premise. I need some sort of support. And my support here is I take my preparation seriously. I show up for classes. I make the right decisions. Maybe I join the GMAT mastery program or take the GMAT Express program. I get access to a question bank. But I make all the right decisions. Therefore, I will get a high score on the GMAT. That's my argument. I need to have these 2 things to create an argument. Not every passage is an argument, but in critical reasoning, most of the passages are going to be arguments, and most of them are arguments by 1 person. So let's take a look at one. Let's do one more question today. Here's a question. I'm going to give you about 1 minute and 3/4. And I'm going to ask you what the answer is. So here you go. Got 15 seconds left, so please choose an answer. Even if you're not sure, it doesn't matter. All right. Going to end the poll right now. Still see a lot of people haven't voted, but that's okay. 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to end the poll. All right, let me share the results with you. As you could see, a lot of people for B, a lot of people for C, but also many people for some other answer choices as well. So let's talk about this question. Well, first of all, when we're looking at this question, very often what we're going to do, and let's call this the sounds right approach, is we're going to read the passage, read the question, and then we're going to try to see what is it that's going on here. Initially, it's a little hard. So many people, especially when I give this question in a live class, when I can actually see what everybody is doing, I see that people are reading this more than once, and then they kind of read the answer choices more than one, use the process of elimination a little bit, circle things out. It's a little hard to understand what's going on. So we are going to focus on what answer choice gives us something about the earthquake, island, and 365, because at least that's what many people say is kind of what's in scope for this question. And if we go through the answer choices this way, A is a little weird, drinking vessels. B sounds familiar. We are talking about the island, the earthquake, and the year. C, D, and E all talk about some sort of artifact, so they do sound weird. What do they really have to do with this? At this point, what most people are going to do is go back, look at the answer choices again, maybe read the passage again, and then just say, B seems the best. So let me pick B. And it takes time. So perhaps we should study more or do this a little more efficiently. And by the way, I didn't yet say what's the right answer. We're going to find out in a moment. Let's learn some rules. And that is, if you want to be efficient with a critical reasoning question, the first thing you should read is the question. Because the question is going to tell you what is it that we're going to be looking for. And the question here says, which one of the answer choices supports the hypothesis? Which means we are trying to make the hypothesis stronger. That's a strengthened question. So how do we tackle strengthened questions? We're going to read the passage. We'll find out what's the conclusion, what's the evidence. The conclusion here specifically was that this was due to the town was destroyed by an earthquake in 365, and the evidence was we have some debris. So we're going to be looking for something that strengthens our conclusion. The destruction was due to this earthquake. Let's see what answer choice actually does that. A doesn't seem relevant. Drinking vessels, what does it have to do with the earthquake? Well, B, how about B? If we know there are a lot of sources of data that tell us that this is what happened, that there was an earthquake, and everybody else is saying this, that should strengthen our hypothesis, right? And for the same very similar reason to A, C, D, and E do seem irrelevant. And that's why most people are going to confidently pick B. And I've noticed as we're picking answers, a lot of people pick B initially, and then some people were kind of maybe hesitating or maybe choosing another answer. So is B the right answer? No, it's not. Even though this is a more efficient way of dealing with the question, we still didn't get to the right answer. So what do we need to do to actually get to the right answer? Let's call this approach the mastery way, which is when we not just know kind of the mechanics, but we also practiced enough, we learn the strategies, we practiced enough, we know what to look for, and we know most importantly, how to identify what wasn't being said. Now, if we want to strengthen a question, there was something that wasn't yet clear to us. So we need to understand what is it that wasn't clear, and we're going to be strengthening that part. We want to make sure it's more clear. So what is not clear? Well, I mean, we know the town was destroyed by an earthquake. We know that. There's debris. That's good enough. We also know there was an earthquake near the island in 8365. So what do we not know yet? Well, What we don't know is whether that earthquake destroyed the town. Is it possible that there was some other earthquake that destroyed the town? Yes, it is. It is possible. Nothing tells us that it's not. So we are going to be looking for some sort of a piece of evidence that tells us it was that earthquake that destroyed the town, not some other. Well, let's see what answer choice does that. How about A? Drinking vessels before and after doesn't really do anything, doesn't tell us it was that earthquake. How about B? It was such a clever trap, and we know it's not the right answer at this point, because B gives us something we already know. We already were given a piece of evidence saying there was an earthquake known to have occurred near the island in AD 365. So why do we need some extra pieces of data? We already established that fact. No, let's look for something we don't know yet. So let's look at C. C tells us that before 365 we had coins, but after 365 we didn't. What this means is in 365 something big happened. Now, we don't know for sure what happened, but if we were to plug it back into the argument and say, well, look, we know the earthquake destroyed the town. We know there was an earthquake in 365, and something really big happened to the town in 365 that likely destroyed it. Is that a better argument than what we had before? Yes, it is. And for that reason, C must be the right answer. No other answer could be right, even though the GMAT suggests in the question that we could have an answer choice that more strongly supports it, right? The GMAT says most strongly. That is misleading. That is simply just to cover the GMAT's legal trail, I would say, just so nobody goes after the GMAT and say, oh, wait a second, I think the D is also stronger. That would never happen on the test. So once you found the right answer, you can stop. And that's why we can also save some time by not reading D and E. We can literally do this question in under a minute, and we got that right. So if you chose C, congratulations. Very few people actually did. But if you did choose C, that's great. If you didn't choose C, congratulations, because you get to learn something. When you come to our class, this is learning by doing. We're gonna make you work by getting into all kinds of traps, all kinds of mistakes. You could think of this as like a military boot camp, because when you go for the real battle, you're gonna know exactly what to expect. And you're gonna be in all kinds of different situations. So that's why in our class, we're gonna encourage you to get the questions wrong, because we can learn from them, we can talk about them. And in fact, we're gonna create all kinds of traps for you, because not because we're mean people, but because we want you to learn. This is an efficient way to learn. And we want you to learn efficiently. We want you to get a good score. This is what it's going to take. So think of this as training to get a high score. And it's going to involve reflecting on what you did wrong. So I hope you enjoyed it. This is also a fairly challenging question. Let's now talk about reading. Now, reading efficiently, of course, as we said, is really important. And when we're thinking about reading comprehension, then most people are going to say, well, wait a second, I know how to read. But yet, when we talk about reading comprehension, most of us, let's just say, not super excited. So what's wrong? Like, why are we not super excited? Well, there are many reasons, but one of them is the passages are extremely boring. So if we want to beat the passage, if we want to do well, we need to have a system. And the system is going to be to how we analyze and how we read the passage. This is a very important skill. We spend quite a bit of time in our class actually teaching you how to read more efficiently. Because that's not really something you can read in a book. That's something you have to experience. That's something you have to do. And something you sometimes have to overcome. But I want to give you a few tips. That's something you can start doing right now, tomorrow, or maybe even tonight or today if it's in the morning for you. How are you going to read? So from now on, when you're going to be reading for the purpose of preparing for the GMAT, you're going to be paying attention to different things. Remember, we said paying attention to detail. So you're going to be paying attention to how the author is making a point, not what the author is saying. For that reason, not knowing something or anything about that subject matter is actually not a problem. In fact, if you don't know anything about the subject matter, that's great. You're not going to be biased in answering your question. You're not going to be bringing in the outside knowledge. You are going to simply focus on how the author is creating a storyline, a narrative of the story. And that's what's going to help you answer the questions quickly. You have about 3 to 4 minutes to read the passage and about a minute per question on each of the passages. And you are going to have 4 passages in 65 minutes. So this skill is going to be critically important if you want to do well in the verbal section. And I'm going to give you a few tips on how to do it. I'm actually going to teach you how to read differently. Here's what you're going to do. Grab a pen or take a screenshot. As you're reading, you're going to stop after each paragraph and you ask yourself a question. What was the purpose of each paragraph? Not what it was saying. I don't want you to be rewriting the whole paragraph. What was the reason why it was there? What was it trying to say? And most importantly, why was it trying to say it? You're going to be doing this with every single paragraph, and sometimes the passages have just one paragraph, so you might need to stop after every sentence or every time the author is changing what the author is talking about. When you finish reading, you're going to ask yourself a question. What was the whole passage about? And you're going to be writing a title for that passage. You're also going to answer a question. What was the author's emotion towards the subject? Was the author neutral? Was the author very critical? And you're going to pick out emotional keywords as you're reading. It's all about paying attention to these keywords. And finally, you ask yourself a question. Why did the author write this? What was the reason? And let me give you a little clue. The reason was not to make our life miserable on the GMAT, because none of these passages were actually written originally for the GMAT. All of them were written for some other purpose, usually because they appeared on some standardized or some peer-reviewed journals. So why? If you can master this skill, you're 60% into doing really well in reading comprehension. And of course, when you come to our GMAT mastery program, we're going to practice this a lot, and we're going to tell you exactly what words to pay attention to, and we're actually going to do a few exercises that are going to help you master that skill. Sounds easy, right? Well, nobody said the GMAT would be easy, but it's doable. And if you feel like verbal is your stronger section, I would really still encourage you to pay attention to it and not neglect it. I'm going to give you an example. Here's Alex. He came to our class also about 6 years ago, and he already did so well in the verbal section. His diagnostic score is 44, which was the top 1% at that time. But he really struggled with quant. He learned all the strategies behind quant, and he was able to improve his quant to 48, which is the maximum score is 51. But even though his quant score wasn't like the highest, and 48 still only 67th percentile, his verbal score was so high because he was able to improve it by learning these additional strategies and practicing even more in our class. His total score was 760. He got a full ride scholarship in his MBA program, and he actually won. His team won the 2nd place worldwide in the economist case competition. He got a job with a consulting firm, and now he has his own business. So his life completely changed because he said, I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to improve both my quant and verbal. I'm going to come to the class, and I'm going to work hard. And it actually just took him 3 months to get to 760. So it is possible, especially if you're starting from around that score, kind of around 580, 600. So the question is, well, how do we do this? What resources could we use to prepare? I'm going to share with you a few different journeys of different people, and then you can decide where you fit. And again, my goal is to show you how to study efficiently. Very often I would go in these GMAT forums, Beat the GMAT, GMAT Club, and I would hear these inspirational stories about how somebody studied for 7 years and finally they got a 650. And I'm like, oh my God, 7 years, 650, this person should have been getting like 1,000 after 7 years, right? So how can we study efficiently? What resources do we need? Let me show you how I studied. Perhaps you can relate. I decided at a very last minute that I want to apply to an MBA program. It was January or February, and the deadline was in March. And I opened the MBA.com and I realized this is the score this is a test where I need to get a score. There's no pass and fail. The score is 200 to 800. And there was a practice test right on that website. So I'm like, I got to do a practice test. I got to see where I stand. I did the practice test, and my first practice score was 650. So if you haven't done a practice test, I would very highly encourage you to take one. And by the way, we're going to give you a free practice test where you can actually simulate what it's going to be like in a real test. And I'm going to give you a link at the end of this class. So what I realized is, okay, there are a few things I forgot. There's a few terms, and I didn't really study in English before, so I needed to refresh a few of the fundamentals. So I did, and I used the resources from mba.com that I was able to download. So a week later, I took the next practice test, and I scored 700. And I thought, okay, well, that looks like a pretty good score. There were only 2 practice tests available at that time. So I feel like I'm probably ready for the school where I wanted to go. They told me 700 is good. So I signed up for the real test, and I got 750 a week later. And the whole process took me just 2 weeks from start to finish. And in case you're wondering, here's my official score report. I'm showing this not to impress you. It impresses me. I think that's really cool. I got 750. February, 2 weeks of studying. Now, in case you're wondering, Sergey is not a genius. And I do have an education from a very prestigious technical university in the former Soviet Union, which is kind of like the Russian MIT. It's all about physics and technology. But I learned the stuff there. I wasn't coming up with the stuff. I learned what other people came up. And the only reason why I got into that university is because I had the right skills to enter that university. And the reason why I had these right skills is in my high school, in my middle school, I got extremely lucky. I had amazing teachers who taught me how to think differently. And this is my math teacher. He taught me how to think outside the box, how to solve these complex problems with limited information. And I participate in different math Olympics and all these kinds of other things. So all of the foundation was really in the middle school and high school. And you know by now that the GMAT just tests what's in the middle school and a little bit from high school. So this is where the foundation came from. So when people are asking me, how long did you study? Well, I said, well, really 2 weeks, but realistically, well, probably 10 years. Because that's what it took me, or maybe 5 or 7 years to really master these skills in school. And because I got so lucky in school, I did really well on pretty much any standardized test I've ever done. And I also became a GMAT instructor because I was so passionate about sharing what I learned. And I got together with people who are much smarter than me. I think I have the lowest score of everybody in our company, 750. Everybody else is 750, 760, 770, 780, all instructors. That's our standard, right? So I feel like they know a lot more. I learned a lot from them as well. And we have a few people who teach for us. They are really all incredibly smart, incredibly engaging. I hope you're having fun here in this class. So if you're wondering, like, is it possible for me to improve from a low base to a high score? Well, it is. You just gotta learn some new strategies. And most specifically, I wanted to give you a quote from one of our students, Daria. She took a diagnostic test and she scored 380. And most people are like, oh my God, this is such a terrible score. But Daria is like, wait a second, I haven't done this sort of stuff before. Yeah, I know some foundations from high school. Maybe I need to refresh them, but I need to learn how to do the test. So she came to our class. Our course is 6 weeks. And as you could see here, she was studying for 7 more weeks, and she managed to get a score of 700. And what really helped her, as you could see, that she learned, in her own words, she learned how to think outside the box. She learned how to manage time and stress. She learned how to, what we call here at Master, think like a CEO. And of course, the instructor was supporting her. She was in the community. There were other people studying with her. And that's really what helped her get an incredibly high score so quickly. And she actually is starting her program in Europe this September. So as for me, what I did to prepare just to come back is I used some free resources. I reviewed my foundations. I had the skills. All I needed to learn is the foundations in English because I learned them in Russian. So if you got really lucky in school and you learned all the right skills and you learned how to think outside the box and you had incredibly gifted teachers, well, first of all, we'd love for you to come and work for us once you get that 760. But in terms of your test, just go and do it. Just book the test and do it. That's all you need is to review the foundations because you already have the skills. But if you take a practice test and your score isn't that great, don't worry. It is possible to improve it, but you need to learn a little more than foundations, a little more than just the book is going to tell you. You need to learn the skill. So how do we do that? Well, most people, when they start studying, they say, okay, I got a test. I got to prepare for this test. How do I do that? Well, what helps prepare for most of the tests, that's what we did before, is have access to a book. Now, if you have a history test, you got to read a book. If you have a GMAT test, got to read a book. We're creatures of habits. By the way, the official GMAT guide 2022 is now out. It comes with the online access as well as with the mobile access. And if you look through it really closely, it essentially is just a question bank. It gives you a bunch of questions from past exams, but it doesn't really teach you how to do these questions. In fact, the new official guide, I just got it a few days ago, it has the verbal review section. And as I was reading it, I'm like, this is great, but I can't use it on a test day because they were talking about inductive arguments. And I'm like, how do I do that? Like, how do I use it? I need the skill. I need to know exactly how to beat the test. Theory is interesting, but I'm not interested in theory. I need some practical strategies. And the book's not going to give it to us because, of course, people who make the test are not going to teach us how to beat the test. So who can teach us how to beat the test? Well, this is where strategy books come into play. So let's talk about the strategy books. Strategy books are every book other than the official GMAT guide. All of these books are going to say they're strategy books because they're written by test prep organizations that use these books in class. So how these books work, and this is just an example, by the way, it's a fairly expensive book, but how these books are being used is you buy the books, or sometimes when you register for a class, you get them for free. You're going to read the book. The book's going to teach you all of the content, which is, by the way, written in the book, just in case we pay attention to. The books actually say this is the content of the test. And then the idea is that you read this book and then you come to a class. Because of course, the books are written by people who teach the class. So they're never going to put all the strategies in the book just because nobody then will come to a class. And I know it may sound unfair, but that's just how business works. But also a lot of the things you really have to experience in a class. You really have to do it and not just read a book. And by the way, in case you're wondering why is, for example, this book really popular and why does it have a really very in-depth content is because this book is actually written by a publishing company that's owned by Amazon. That's why when you go on Amazon, you're going to see these books pretty heavily promoted. So by now you might be thinking, okay, well, Sergey is probably going to say it is not possible to study with books. And I'm not going to say this, but I just want to put everything out there. You're going to be the person who will need to make a decision. I'm just here to give you information so that you can make the decision how to study. But let me give you the information just so you go with your eyes fully open. And that is, firstly, books teach the theory, but not the skills. The theory is important, but it's not enough. The books usually don't tell you what's really important. They're going to give you all the theory, but they don't say, oh, this piece is going to show up a lot more often than this piece. Of course, because they're written by test prep organization, there's just an inherent conflict of interest. If a $20 book for a $2,000 course, usually just, again, the company is not going to put everything in a book. And most of the things is not even possible to put in a book. When you read a book, you can't really ask a question. The book is not a live object or not a human that can answer the question. And here's even a bigger problem. And we hear this a lot, that only about 10% of people, when they buy a new book, read past the first chapter. And this is across the board. Like, you probably have some books on your shelf where you never read. And I have the same books. And this is statistically, in terms of self-help books or any sort of educational books, most people think it's a good idea. They read the first chapter and they're like, okay, I'm going to read it sometime, some other time. And this is actually, I'm going to want to show you another graph, also from one of these conferences that I attended with the GMAT. And this is a little bit about how people make decisions about coming to MBA programs. Every year, or master's programs, every year about 7 million people decide it would be a really good idea to do an MBA or a master's. They go on MBA.com, they look for information, and then 2 million people actually register. Of these 2 million people that register, only 10% will do the real test. So 90% of people who put in their email address, some of their information, will say it's a really good idea to do the GMAT. 90% of people wouldn't read past the first chapter. They would give up. And of the 200,000 people that actually do the test, only 24,000, which is 0.3% of the number of people that started. So 1 in 300 people would actually do the real test. Now, if you come to this class, you probably don't want to be among the 299 people. You want to be in the top 1 out of 300 people. So how do you do this? What would really help? Let me give you a quote from another person. What helps her the most? And Darini, and with her permission, she actually said that it's okay to share her story. She was trying to study for about 4 years for the GMAT. And finally, she just said, you know, I either give up or I do something different. And she learned from her own mistakes. She said, I need the structure. I need a plan. I need to know exactly what I'm going to do every day. Now, I want to ask you, if you've already been studying a lot, do you have a plan day by day? Do you know exactly how many questions and what questions you're going to do every single day? And if you don't, it's time to create this plan. And for Darini, that's exactly what helped her. We created a plan every single day. She knew what sort of a homework she needs to do. She was learning things in class. She was practicing on her own. And also 3 months, actually very similar story to Daria. She was actually in the same class with Daria, surprisingly. And she was able to get from 500 to 700 in just 3 months. She couldn't believe it. She actually gave herself at least 6 months. She said, if I try to study for 4 years, it's gonna take at least 6 months. But it literally just took us 3 months, and she was able to get a score of 700 because of the structure and because of that community around her. She was studying with other people in the class. She was bouncing ideas. She was even sharing ideas about the application. And she applied and she got into her dream school, and she's going there this September as well. And the virtual classes, I know that many people are wondering, well, how do the classes really work? But right now, we can't have in-person classes yet. Hopefully, will soon. But could the virtual classes work as well? And for Darini, they did. And for most people, we actually did a poll because we offer free repeat policy for a year. And many people who came to us in person would then come and repeat the class. So some of them were right in the middle of the class when we had to switch in March of 2020 to a virtual class. And every single person said, you know, the virtual class is actually quite fun because I can be at home, I can watch the instructor, I can be on a web camera, we can talk to people. And now we have people from all over the world. Even though we're a Canadian company, we used to be just in Canada and the United States, but now we have people literally like in the Philippines, in India, in Korea taking our classes. So if you are curious, if you'd like to join us, if you'd like to join our GMAT Mastery Program, this is a program philosophy is really to teach you the right skills to prepare and to guide you step by step. You're going to be in a fairly small class, 10 to 15 people. We're going to give you all the study materials, and we're going to work with you as long as it takes for you to get a good score. So you're going to be in a class for about 60 hours over 6 or 12 weeks. We're going to give you some tutoring sessions, and you can come back and retake classes as well. There are 2 formats for these classes. You can either take a class in the evening. So that's around now. We actually have a class that's going on right now that started a couple of weeks ago. And you can also take our class on weekends. So depending on your time zone, what's more convenient for you, you can take the class on Saturday, Sunday morning, or Tuesday, Thursday night. Now, our class is approximately $1,500 Canadian, and many people might think it's expensive. But the thing is, when we put everything in perspective about the cost of education and the sort of the opportunity cost or the amount of time that I'm going to save, any day of the week, I can put this course against any sort of a self-prep program. And I'm going to tell you, this is going to be a much better investment. And actually, just in case you're wondering, the self-prep programs, most of the self-prep programs are actually fairly expensive. So let's say we go on GMAT forums and ask, well, what are the good courses? And some people say, well, take Target Test Prep, right? So Target Test Prep is $399 and it's for 6 months. There's so much information and it doesn't really tell you what's important. And most people take it for 2 periods, 12 months. There is no personalized study plan. If you want tutoring, that's $300 an hour. That's in US dollars, by the way. The teaching is all about the content of the test. And most people are saying, well, but for verbal, you need this other company. That's another $349. Oh, but I need mock exams as well. That's another $100. Well, but my practice isn't adaptive, so I'm wasting a lot of time working on easy questions if I'm already at hard, or hard questions if I'm at easy. I don't get any hard copy books to take notes, which is also helpful. And usually with self-study programs, people improve about 50 to 70 points. So there's sometimes a guarantee saying, well, if you improve 50 points, that's good. And if we put everything together, if we add everything up, that's over $2,000. Well, our program here at Admit Master, in US dollars, it's $12.99. In Canadian, that's $14.99 if you sign up for any future course. And it's going to be a live class. And there is a guarantee. And the guarantee is if you want to get a good score, you will get it. Because we will make sure that you get it, because we're going to be with you every step of the way. Think of this as learning how to ride a bicycle. I have a 4-year-old at home. She's going to learn how to ride a bicycle. So you remember maybe your parents or your older siblings, they were holding the bike, and then you were trying to take a few steps, and then one day they just let the bike go, and sometimes we would fall. But they pick you up, dust you off, and they put you back on the bike, and then eventually you learned how to ride the bike, and now you're a really good bike rider. That's exactly what's going to happen in our program as well. We're going to make things fun. We're going to get used to do some exercises, and then if you fall, we're going to pick you up, dust you off, put you back on a saddle, and we're going to be with you until the time when you're ready for whichever score you need. Some you need 600, some you need 700, some you need 750. That's okay. We'll be working together, and it's a one-time investment, and you're going to have a lot of interaction, a lot of support from your instructors and from your community as well. And on average, our students get a scholarship of about $15,000. That's an average. And on average, our students improve close to 200 points. So we do keep track of the success of our students. On the average GMAT score worldwide is 560. Canada, United States is approximately the same. The average score of our students is 670. And 35% of our graduates achieve scores of 700 or more. And it really depends on what score you need. And the reason why it's 670 and not higher is that not everybody actually needs a 750. But if you need 750, you're going to be able to get it. So just to wrap up, and we're going to now get into our application process and talk with Corey about what it's actually going to take to get in. If you're really thinking about getting a high score, as long as you give yourself enough time, or as long as you have a lot of time to dedicate, you can get that score. When people are asking me, can I get a 760? My answer is always yes. Let's see where you're starting from. Take a practice test. Let's figure things out. Fionn is a nurse in the emergency room. She can only study 4 to 5 hours a day, or 4 to 5 hours a week. So it took her about 7 to 8 months, but she was able to get a score of 760. She called me, said, Sergey, what can I do with this amazing GMAT score? Brian was the opposite. He said, I have 40 hours a week, but I got just 7 weeks. I need to do the GMAT now. I'm moving to California. I started a job with Google. I got to get 760 because that's what it's going to take for me to get into my dream school. So he was super dedicated. He was following a plan. He was able to achieve it. So with time, and again, I want you to study efficiently, not waste a lot of time, but get the results as quickly as you possibly can. Now, some of you are joining us from other countries. So some people are asking, will we continue our online classes? Well, for now, we are planning to continue our online classes, but we don't know. So I'd like to encourage you, if you are joining us not from Canada, United States, don't wait. This is really time while these classes are still available. Join us, and you're going to get the GMAT done before you know it. Here's the quote. We have Daniela from Ecuador who was saying, I've been trying for a long time, and finally, actually, because of the pandemic, I can take these online classes, and it's really amazing. It's not something that's available in my country. Now, for some of you, taking a live class might not be possible for different reasons. Sometimes for budget reasons, sometimes for timing reasons. So we have a couple of other options. You can take our course in the on-demand format, the same course, but you're going to get access to class recordings. It's a little more affordable because you're not coming to a live class. Or you can say, I don't want to work with the instructor. I just need to have foundations and access to the classes. I don't need kind of the more advanced strategies because I've been really fortunate in school. So I just need access to all sorts of practice and the foundations. There's an amazing program that we have as well. It is included in the GMAT Mastery offerings, but it is a more affordable option for you to study if you have more time, if you need a smaller improvement, or if you just need a lot of practice. You can find all of these, and you can actually get some free demos at admitmaster.com/offer. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite you to commit to mastering these skills. You can join us in our live classes. We're going to have our next Master Refresher class. You can take the practice test for free, as I mentioned, at mcgill.trygmat.com. And you can find all of that at admitmaster.com/offer. Speaking about McGill, as I've mentioned, we have a very dear guest today. And that guest is Corey from the admissions office at the Desertelle Faculty of Management at McGill University. I have a few questions for Corey that I've prepared so that we can have an interactive discussion. I'm going to ask Corey to share a few things, a few insights about how the application process really works from the perspective of the McGill University. And actually, let me get this out of the way. And let me just ask, just do a quick poll here, just in case you are interested in me sending you certain resources, or if you're interested in me chatting with you or reaching out to you, just let me know. And we'll connect in the next day or two, and we can have a personal chat. So let me ask Corey. Corey, thanks so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure when you are able to join us. I know you always bring a wealth of information, a wealth of different insights. So let's share a few strategies, a few tips with our participants today. I actually wanted to ask you a question, and that is an important question that on many people's minds, and that is, when it comes to MBA, there are one-year programs and there are two-year programs. And I think you are very uniquely positioned to answer this question because McGill actually offers both a one-year and a two-year program. So what's the difference? Who are the right people, and how could people here on this call make a decision about what program to take?
Sure. So thank you so much, Sergey. Thank you for an informative session. As it relates to our different programs, the one-year program is very much oriented towards those who are looking to level up their skills, get their MBA degree in as short amount of time as possible. This is great if you're looking to continue in your current line of business. So let's say you work in finance and you want to continue in the same industry. A one-year MBA is a great opportunity to get that MBA, gain those skills, and then return to the workforce as soon as possible. Of course, if you're looking to reorient your career, so let's say you want to go from finance to consulting, the two-year program is a great option because we have that 4-month full-time internship that will give you the chance to get those skills, to get your foot in the door in a new industry. And our two-year program is also very popular among our international students who are looking to gain Canadian work experience. If you're looking to take our program and then work in Canada afterwards with the post-graduation work permit, it's a great opportunity to have 4 months of full-time work employment in Canada, and that can help align you with future career opportunities. So that's the major difference we see for our 1- and 2-year programs when people are making that choice.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing this. And I also wanted to add to what you alluded to is if somebody's coming here as a new immigrant, if somebody's coming to Canada and actually wants to use their degree towards a future opportunity to get a Canadian residency, then a 2-year option is going to give them an opportunity to get an open work permit for 3 years. which will then create a clear path towards immigration. We have a lot of people here from different countries, so that's an important consideration as well. What about the master's programs? And again, you're very uniquely positioned because McGill offers a lot of amazing master's programs. Why would somebody choose a master's program versus an MBA? How could they make this decision?
Sure. So we have 3 Masters of Management programs. They specialize in different areas. So we have one in analytics, one in finance, and one in retailing. And of course, we have the MBA program, and you can do several specializations in that as well. It ultimately depends what your career goals are. If you're looking for a more technical role, we usually recommend our Masters of Management programs because you focus in that specific area and you gain a very in-depth skill set in one area. For example, you take the program in analytics and you're going to have very in-depth knowledge about the technical skills related to analytics and the big field of data analytics. On the other hand, if you're looking to, for example, climb the company ladder and to attain those higher level leadership positions, we usually recommend the MBA because you gain those general leadership skills and the general managerial skills. So you'll learn a bit in every area. So you'll learn about strategy, you'll learn about finance, you'll learn about accounting, you'll learn about human resources, and that well-rounded business approach can help you then achieve different career goals. Of course, with our specializations, you can then focus in a specific area. So let's say you wanted to work in marketing, you can take our specialization in marketing, gain those skills, become, for example, a consultant, an analyst, or so on in the field of marketing, and then move up in terms of positions. So starting, for example, as an analyst, moving to a team lead, manager, director, vice president, and so on. It helps you go along that path with those key management skills.
Thank you so much, Corey. Let's get into the application process a little bit. And of course, the actual application checklist could be easily found on the McGill website. I want to talk a little bit about what's not really listed as clearly to really give a lot of value to people who came here. When you're thinking about evaluating candidates, when you're looking at a candidate's application, sometimes you would say, this is a good candidate. And sometimes you'll say, I'm not quite sure. So what actually makes someone a good candidate in your views as you as assessing application?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. There are a lot of factors. Of course, with our MBA program, we do look at your academic side. It is a very tough academic program. So we look at your grades during undergraduate degree, your GMAT score. Of course, we don't have a minimum, but just to give you an idea, our average accepted GMAT is a 675. That's the average. So some may score lower and some may score higher. But having a strong GMAT score is a great way to differentiate yourself in the application process, and it does get the attention of our admissions committee. Of course, simply having a strong GMAT, such as you who had a 750, is not a one-way ticket to entry into our program. You really have to have the full profile. So in terms of your work experience, in terms of your letters of reference, your overall CV, if you've been involved in extracurricular activities, we really value your entire profile. So it's not one element that will make or break an application. It really is your entire profile. And of course, if you're invited for an interview after applying, that's a great way to go beyond what your scores say about you. And we really want to see the potential you have, not necessarily to be the next CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but to carve your own path and what success means to you. So in terms of the overall profile, it's something we really value, to have a well-rounded profile. So of course, strong academics, because it is one of the core McGill values that we have strong academic programs and we're renowned for our academic strength, but also having those people skills and having the other components of your profile. So great work experience and having the opportunity to be involved in extracurricular activities. Those are all the kind of added bonuses of a great application.
Thank you so much, Corey. You've actually touched upon what makes the MBA program at McGill different from some of the other programs, for example. And you've touched upon that it's very in-depth academically. And by the way, the person who is teaching a class tonight, Tristan, I'm sure you probably heard of Tristan, known Tristan. He is our instructor. He actually graduated from the McGill program in 2019. He can't stop talking about how great was the program and how also it was really in depth and challenging academically. What else makes the program unique and special?
Sure. So compared to other universities and other MBA programs, we have a very small cohort. We really want to focus on that personalized teaching and professional development. Of course, some universities may have MBA programs that have 400 or 500 students. You really do get lost in the confusion. You are one of 400 students or 500 students, so you don't get that personalized service. We really want to emphasize that each one of our students is able to make an impact in the classroom and that their perspectives are important. They may have different academic backgrounds, different professional backgrounds, and different cultural backgrounds. We have students all around the world, and we want them to be able to contribute their knowledge and their experience. Of course, it's a great opportunity in the classroom, but in the end, when you pursue an MBA program, you're looking for that post-graduation experience. So what's your next job? How are you going to move up in your career? So that's where our career services come in. So over the entire length of your degree, you have access to a one-on-one career coach, so you can meet with them on a bi-weekly basis to build your professional skills and land that post-graduation job that you're looking for to make that nice career jump. So for us, we emphasize our small cohort, a personalized environment, and then our career services, which are among the best in terms of the MBA programs.
And that's really, really important. I can speak from my own experience. When I did my MBA, I really felt like the career service was really, really important. And we hear this a lot. And not every school would actually have a really good career center. Many of the things that you're going to learn at different schools are going to be actually very similar, because most of the schools are using similar books and many schools use different professors. What really makes programs different, what I find is the level of support from the program, the level of career coaching, as well as the quality of the candidates that actually come in. That's why when you're actually entering into a program, you're essentially going through a very competitive application process, because then you're going to be associated with the graduates from this program that are well known and are well respected in the industry. So that's one of the reasons why we usually advise, when we speak with our clients, we advise them to choose wisely what program they're going to be applying to. And that actually brings us to an important point, is that getting into an MBA program, the McGill MBA is a significant investment. It's a considerable investment, and most people might have to get a loan or get help from the relatives. So it is that big investment. So what's the return on investment? What could somebody expect? And is it worth it to invest a fairly large amount of money into the education for 1 or 2 years? What's your take on this?
Sure. So we get that question quite often, given that our tuition fees hover around about $100,000 Canadian. So in terms of your return on investment, first and foremost, the personalized level of teaching you are receiving, it's unparalleled to other universities. Our curriculum is dynamic and has the ability to change to meet the market demands. In terms of how we see the return on investment, when you're working with a career coach and you can meet with someone individually, it's not saying that you only meet with a career coach once and then that kind of uses up your service. You can really meet with them on a bi-weekly basis to make sure that your career path is planned out and that you have opportunities lined up, great opportunity. And then if we look in the bigger scheme of things, the McGill brand name, regardless of what country you are in the world, what city, you will meet someone who's connected to our big McGill family. We have over 250,000 alumni spread all across the world. So chances are, if you say, yes, I studied at McGill, I did my MBA at McGill, people know the name and they know the quality of our institution. That has opened doors for so many of our alumni that they have the opportunity to say, I was hired not only because of my skills, but because of where I got my degree. The McGill name speaks to the quality of our students. And of course, once you're down your career line 5, 10, 15 years, you still have access to our career services. So you're really part of this long-lasting network where it simply isn't you do your program for a year or 2 years and then we say goodbye, we part ways, and then you leave. You really have the opportunity to use our services and to maintain that network and those connections with our program, with our faculty, and with the university. It's a lifelong commitment as we see it, and there are benefits all down the road. You can have alumni events across the world. We regularly have alumni events in different cities. So you continually grow your network, and that leads to your next opportunity. As we all know, your network is your power. So with us, it's a great opportunity to connect with alumni across the world. And it's always a great conversation starter when two people pursued an MBA, even if it was 40 years apart. Once they do it at McGill, they're connected. So that's what we see as a return on investment.
Thank you so much, Corey. And I can speak from my own experience. Whenever we want to achieve something in life, we can't do it ourselves, right? Sometimes we need a coach. Sometimes we need a friend. Sometimes we need a partner. And the opportunity to connect with a lot of smart, hardworking people, dedicated people is really important. That's why here at McMaster, we also have an alumni network where you're going to be able to connect with people who are studying for the GMAT, but also with people who've been through our program, really the hundreds and the thousands of people. And some of them went to different countries, the different paths in life, and you're going to be able to connect with them. So this is actually really important. I find that through my MBA, my connections that I've made, I've done my MBA over 15 years ago, there's still the connections that I value and cherish the most. And if I need something to solve some sort of a challenging problem, or I need to bounce off some ideas, I would be calling my peers from my university, even though we've graduated a long time ago. I also wanted to share with everyone that I mentioned that I was at this GMAT conference that we get invited every year. And there was actually this conference just earlier this week. And there was some new statistics about return on investment of an MBA. And the statistics was that on average, an MBA graduate today, that's the most current data, and it's actually going to be published at the end of this month. So we got a little bit of a preview. Statistically, a person with an MBA will make over the next 35 years of their career, they're going to make $3 million more, and that was in US dollars, versus somebody who has just a bachelor's degree. Now that's an average across all schools. So if you can imagine, if you are going to a top school such as McGill, then that number might actually be higher than average. Right? So that's a return. I can speak from my own perspective. I paid off my debt 5 years after I graduated. It was really hard. I was working hard to pay off my debts, but from that moment on, it was just going up. So I wouldn't be here if I didn't have my MBA. So for me, it was an amazing return on investment, both personally and professionally as well. I have one more question for you, and then we can open the floor. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. But there's a question that a lot of people ask, and that is, well, I understand that this is a major return on investment, but can I make my return on investment even better by getting an entrance scholarship? Instead of paying $100,000 or $80,000, is there a way that I could pay less for my degree? How are these decisions being made? I know some people are getting very large scholarships. Some people are getting much smaller scholarships. Some people are getting no scholarships. So how are you making these decisions?
Sure. So for our MBA students, on average, about 80% of them receive some form of financial scholarship. It ranges significantly from about $5,000 Canadian to half tuition, with the average being $14,000 Canadian. To your point of what factors differentiate our strong scholarships versus our less sizable ones is the academic factors. So having a strong GPA, having a strong GMAT score, that's where having, for example, a 750, a strong competitive score, can positively influence your amount of scholarship. Of course, if you have extracurricular activity, great work experience, great letters of reference, all of these factors plug into it, but having a strong overall profile, so that means having a strong GMAT, strong GPA, strong work experience, strong letters of reference, strong CV, strong essay questions, all of those different components positively influence the amount of financial scholarship you will receive. Because after all, we are an academic program and we look for academic excellence. And one way to determine academic excellence is based on the GMAT score. Of course, if you have a profile that doesn't necessarily have a very strong GMAT or a very strong GPA, there still is scholarship opportunities based on some other criteria, such as leadership experience, such as your volunteer experience. But for the most part, our donors look for strong academic profiles. So having a strong GMAT score is a great way to increase or positively influence the amount of scholarship you will receive. Of course, we don't have full ride scholarships. Paying half tuition could be a great way to take our program as well.
Absolutely, that dramatically increases the return on investment. So if anybody here, or if you're listening to this call and you're thinking, wow, I'm really excited, I would like to explore my application to McGill, what would be the next step? Would somebody be able to get in touch with you to have a personal chat? Would they just kind of go on a website? What would you recommend?
Sure. So there are a couple of different ways to do that. Of course, after this session, we will be sending you some additional information from the McGill side, just to give them some MBA information and some general information about our program. You can always attend our online information sessions, which is an hour-long session where I talk about the entire program. So the content of the program, what our classes are like. Then, of course, we'll go into the more fine details of what the admission requirements are, what the application looks like, and so on. And then once you get that general information, to dig a little bit deeper, you can attend our admissions how-tos, usually in the fall, where we provide detailed information about what you can do to give your application a little bit of the upper edge by saying, this is how you answer, for example, your essay questions. This is the factors our admissions committee is looking for. So there's a couple different ways, but of course, same way with AdmitMaster, the best way to get information is through our website. We update it regularly, so it's important to check it as often as possible.
Awesome, thank you so much, Corey. And the same thing, if you're thinking, okay, well, where do I start with the GMAT? Then please get in touch with us. We have a lot of information on our website, but I would love for us to connect one-on-one as well. I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to share some ideas with you. I'd love to bounce some ideas with you. I'd like to give you some things to think about, and perhaps to give you a little bit of guidance on how you can actually achieve that very high GMAT score that might be necessary or might be important for you to get in, for you to get a scholarship. So let's connect. We are going to be following up with you by email, so please look for an email. We're going to send you a few resources. We're going to send you access to the free practice test, and we're going to send you a link. So if you'd like to chat, let me know. And if you've already said in the poll that you'd like to connect or you'd like access to some of our resources, then we'll be following up with you tomorrow as well. So please stay in touch. We'll look forward to seeing you soon. We look forward to seeing you in our class, in our future workshops, and the future information sessions. If this is the step that's really important for you, please do know there are people who really care about you. There are people who really want you to help, and there are people who want you to succeed. That's our mission. That's Corey's mission, is we want really to help you take your life to the next level and help you achieve your dreams so that you can perhaps maybe then contribute back to our society and you can become a future leader. And it's not just about making $3 million, although I think that's a pretty good sum to have in your bank account when you retire, but it's really about making a difference in the world. So if you have that mission, if you're thinking, well, I would really love to do something, but I'm just perhaps lacking the skills or lacking the education, but I know I can do this, I'd love to help you. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you so much, Corey, for joining us tonight as well. And we'll look forward to connecting with everybody shortly.
Great. Thank you so much, Sergey, and thank you everyone for attending our session this evening.
Thank you, and take care, everyone.